Hey, welcome back to the show. I am super, really excited to have Deborah on today because we're going to be talking about nervous system regulation. And I know that's a big buzzword that's starting to go around, but it's more than a buzzword. There's a lot of goodness and there's a lot of science backing it. And I'm just super excited to have this conversation. So welcome, Deborah. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, absolutely. So and just have you tell the audience a little bit about your story, about how you got to where you are today, what made you kind of go into that direction of nervous system regulation, and how you got into wellness and all the fun things that people like to know about you.
Yeah, absolutely. I really started digging into health and wellness a long time ago. I knew I wanted to be in the health field, even from the times I was really young. And I decided to become a massage therapist because I didn't want to spend, my whole life in school to
Yeah.
become a doctor or naturopath, even though that was a dream of mine. So I was like, you know what, I'll just start with massage therapy. It's a year-long school and I'll start there. And so that was kind of the beginning of learning about the body, learning about how we function, learning about the nervous system, but also digging into some other things. I mean, in the experience of going through massage school, you get into codependency, you get into perfectionism, you get into a whole lot of different things. And I did that right out of high school. So I kind of started working on myself at that point, which you have to do when you're in such an intimate relationship with someone working, doing body work. And that was kind of the beginning. But it was when I had my son pretty young. My son was about 18 months old, and he's 19 now. I had my first panic attack. And I thought of myself as a very calm person. Like I was the calm friend that people went to. I did not think of myself as having anxiety or being an anxious person. And actually, when I had my first panic attack, I didn't know what it was. I thought I was dying. I didn't know. It actually took me about 2 years to even figure out that it was a panic attack. I was sitting at a restaurant with some friends, and all of a sudden, I had what felt like tingles all through my body. My heart started beating really fast. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I got really nauseous. I had to go to the bathroom and I didn't understand what was happening. Like I wasn't in an anxious situation. It was just this overwhelming feeling and it kept on happening. And so I went to the doctor. They couldn't figure out what was happening. They thought maybe there's something wrong with my heart. They thought maybe it was my gallbladder. My chiropractor thought maybe I had a hiatal hernia. Like there was all these different things that they were trying to figure out. And it wasn't until I started digging into, and it was giving me a lot of anxiety what was happening.
Right.
It wasn't right. And it wasn't until I started actually looking into the nervous system and how it functions and reading about anxiety that I realized, oh, these are panic attacks. That's what this is.
I
Um,
want to stop you for a second because it's amazing that you figured it out and with a personality like yours and doing the digging and doing the research, but it's kind of sad that you've been going to different people for so many years, trying to figure it out, and you go to the next person and you go to the next person, and you're not the only one that this happens to. And so that's why I wanted to kind of bring that to light. If you're somebody out there who is having issues and you can't figure it out and you're going to people and you keep getting like the closed door, don't give up, because eventually something will shine, that light will come through and things will start, to become more clear for yourself. But you have to do the work. You can't just rely on other people.
Absolutely. And thankfully now anxiety is a much more understood thing.
Yes.
And I think, I don't know that it would have taken that long at this point to know that. And, someone now, I think if they went to or talked about, what was going on with them to their healthcare professional, they would understand what was happening. But back then it wasn't as understood. And part of the reason why I like sharing that is because still to this day, people don't understand what a panic attack is, because you don't necessarily feel panic. I assumed that
Mhm.
you're in a panicked mode and that's what causes a panic attack, which can be true. But it could also be you're sitting there having a conversation with someone and then it comes on. You don't necessarily have to be in an anxious state for that to happen just because of the way that the body works. And I just recently had someone reach out to me and say that they had anxiety, but theirs looked really different than most people's. And then they went on to describe all the symptoms that they were having. And I was like, yeah, that's a panic attack. But they didn't know that.
Mhm.
And they didn't want to talk to their even counselor about it because they thought there was maybe something really wrong with them. So
Yeah.
it's important that people understand that this can happen even when you're not feeling anxious. And that was my
Yeah.
experience for sure.
So that's so interesting that you bring that up, because I remember when my youngest daughter, I think she might have been like 1 or 2, and I had to have a surgery. Um, and it was, not, it was like an outpatient surgery, but I remember after that, for me, I've probably had like 2 or 3 anxiety attacks over my lifetime, but I thought I was having a heart attack like you, because I was, the whole process of like getting my parents there, having them help with the kids, all the things were in place. I already had the surgery. I was home recovering. We were getting ready to have a life altering situation of moving happening, but I did not feel anxious. And I was literally in my office on my computer answering a few emails. And all of a sudden I came out to my mom and I said, I think I'm having a heart attack. Like the feeling that came over, it was so, and of course, my parents rushed me to the hospital thinking, because I didn't know what it was, but I mean, because it does mimic that. You sweat, you're profusely sweating. I mean, it's like crazy. And I do remember, they did all the tests and all the things, and it came back as all clear. So it was like, you must just have anxiety. So then I'm like, oh, that was like my first, I was like, okay. I was like, well, I don't really feel that anxious. Yes, I have a lot of life things going on, but like you, I feel pretty like happy. We're moving back home. Like it was all good things, but and, their diagnosis was, here's an antidepressant, and at
Mhm.
that time I was not educated enough to understand that that was just a Band-Aid. And as that was kind of my first experience of understanding, you know, this could help me manage it, but it wasn't going to solve it. And so then I had to start figuring that out, because again, even, 19 years or well, I guess like 14 years ago, the diagnosis was, here's a pill, and so I want people to
Yeah.
know that there's much beyond just that pill. Do you need the pill sometimes? Yes, to get you through, to let you be able to calm and focus so that you can focus on figuring out what the other parts are. So not discounting Western and medication at all, because sometimes it is needed, but it is that and they forget the and part. So I love that,
Absolutely.
you're doing the work you're doing because you're teaching people the and I think that's super important. So when someone comes to you and they describe something that seems like a panic attack, something, seems like they have anxiety, obviously we're all bio-individual. We all come from different things. We have different experiences, but what is like just I guess, simple way of getting started that people listening could dip their toe in to start the process of understanding that there are tools out there?
Yeah, I think the very first thing that's important, and that was really important for me in order to be able to get to a point to where I wasn't having panic attacks anymore, is just understanding the nervous system. Because when you have anxiety, when you have these things happening, your body becomes your enemy because you think it's doing this thing. I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know when the anxiety is going to come up. Or maybe you do. Maybe there are specific situations where you get really anxious and you have anxiety. And so you do all you can to avoid those situations, and you start to fear your body's response. You start to fear, like I remember I went through a long period where I would lay in bed and I could not feel my heartbeat. If I could feel my heartbeat, it would give me anxiety because I thought my heart's going to stop. I thought I was going to die. I was constantly stuck in this mindset of I'm going to die. I might not wake up tomorrow. I'm going to die. That was what my anxiety did. And so I had to lay in a way that if I felt my heartbeat, I'd get really major anxiety. I had to lay where I couldn't feel my heartbeat. So I had to first understand what the nervous system's role was and exactly what was happening in my body when I was experiencing anxiety. So understanding what it means to have a dysregulated nervous system. That's been being talked about a lot, but I think a lot of people don't actually know what that means. And
Yeah, could you
so
explain it a little bit?
yeah, absolutely. So the way that I like to explain it is kind of like a smoke alarm in your house. So our nervous system is necessary for life. It's weird. And I'm talking about the autonomic nervous system. So this is the branch of the nervous system that basically is constantly deciding whether or not you are safe. It's determining whether or not you are in any kind of danger. And it puts you in one of two pathways, which is either your parasympathetic nervous system or your sympathetic nervous system. Your parasympathetic nervous system is when it's known as rest and digest. That's when you're calm. That's when digestion is easy. That's when you're having a good time with your friends. You're in a calm state. Your body's in a calm state. Your heart rate is normal. Your muscle tone is normal. Like you're in that calm state. Or there's fight or flight, which that is when your digestion stops. That is when your body is focused on, I need to either fight to get out of the situation or I need to flee to get out of the situation. And we need both. Neither one is good or bad. Like fight or flight is not a bad response. It is there for a reason. And we use it every day. When you're driving to work and you need to be on guard and you need to, like, someone swerves into you, that fight or flight response is going to kick on, and you need it in those instances. If you didn't have that, you wouldn't be able to react quickly to protect yourself from things. But the problem is when you're existing there, when you're majority of the time living in that state. And that is when you're not digesting your food, you're not healing your body, and you end up with all sorts of other symptoms. So a dysregulated nervous system means you are not easily moving back and forth between all the different states of the nervous system. So the way I like to describe it is like a smoke alarm in the house. You want a smoke alarm in the house. If you have a fire in your home and there's smoke, you want it to go off and alert you. You don't want the smoke alarm to go off because your neighbors down the street are cooking bacon. Right. A dysregulated nervous system is one where that fight or flight response is triggered because you're just uncomfortable. It should be triggered because something is potentially life-threatening. But for most of us, it's triggered because of something maybe a little smaller, or maybe it's because of fear of something major happening that isn't a definite. Like it could be because you're afraid you might lose your job. And so that fight or flight instant, is triggered in that instance because, oh, my boss might get mad at me. Maybe I'm running late to work. My boss is going to be mad at me, and then he might fire me. And if he fires me, then I could lose my job. If I lose my job, then I might lose my house. And if I lose my house, I might lose my spouse. And I might that's what our brain does, right? It goes all the way down the line of consequences of different things. So we want, again, a healthy nervous system. And there's times when it's appropriate to go into that fight or flight response, but when we're too easily going into it, or we have struggled to come out of it, that means your nervous system is dysregulated.
Yeah, that's such a great explanation. And I love that. And I think a lot of people have heard, the bear chasing you kind of explanation, which is not, a common thing. But what is common is the work situation. I think a lot of children, with the way our society has come, they're in it a lot more because they have a lot of the social issues because they've been able to hide behind a screen a lot. And they haven't had to go through that. Standing up in class is uncomfortable, right? It is an uncomfortable process, but you have to learn to work through that. So then it becomes, you're not stuck there in that freak out. You just get up, you get your nervous system you learn tools to get it regulated so that you can be successful. And sometimes that takes multiple times of doing it. But what I have found with kids in general, or teens, is that because they're not putting themselves in these situations enough at the appropriate ages, they're not able to cope as well because they don't have the tools. So
absolutely,
I think it's super important for listeners who are parents of children to understand our kids have had a disservice, not because there's something wrong with them. It's a disservice because the way our society has shifted, and it's shifted in a way that is causing them not to have these experiences that you and I might have had. In 6th grade, I took a 0 on every stand-up presentation because I was like, I am not, because I had that fear of like people looking at you, people, all the things. So I calculated it out that if I took a 0 on everything, I would still pass the class. And that was a terrible coping, but my mom didn't even know I did that. It was like just a thing. And I look back and I, now I can kind of giggle about it because, if I just pushed through it, if someone just had coached me through that and given me the tools, who knows what life would, I mean, obviously my life is wonderful, but it's like, who knows what would have shifted sooner for me had I had those tools earlier. So I do think, if you're someone listening and you're experiencing these things yourself, learning tools will help you to manage, because the way I look at anxiety, and you can tell me, it's like, it's always going to be there. It doesn't go away. It's not something that you can just, cut off, throw in the trash and move on. It's always going to be with you. So in understanding, I think was the first thing I heard you say, understanding that that's what's happening, awareness, and then inviting it. Like, you can come along, but you're not going to drive the boat, right? You're going to be behind me. You're going to sit in the back seat. You're going to be, but in my shadow, whatever you want to call it. You can come, but you're not going to dictate everything. And I think that's where you can get into that healthy balance of the in and out. So Awareness being the first thing I think is super important for everybody. And then what are some different modalities or tools? Because again, it's different for everybody that you teach that people could try on, and see how it feels for them.
Yeah. So a really simple thing as we're going through a day, especially when we're really busy and we're just in our work and we're moving around and maybe we're kind of a little bit in that fight or in that sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight mode, we're not in our bodies. We're not aware of our senses. And being in your body is very much an action of the parasympathetic nervous system. So something as simple as, and this is something that Dr. Nicole LePera talks about that I love, is every time you wash your hands, notice, pay attention, take that moment, we should wash our hands right a little bit faster anyway, or not, we don't want to do it too fast, but take that moment and just feel the sensations. What do my hands feel like in this moment? What is the texture of my skin? Is it rough? Is it soft? Is it smooth? What's the temperature of the water? What does the soap smell like? What do the bubbles look like as I'm washing, as I'm getting those bubbles on my hands? And every sensation that you can try and explore, doing that calms your nervous system down, gets you back into your body, and allows you to start using your senses. Even if you're not washing your hands, you can do that at any time. You can also, wherever you are right now, stop and notice how your feet feel on the ground. Or maybe you're laying down. What does your body feel like? Whatever your body is pressing into in this moment, if it's your feet, if it's the rest of you, notice what it feels like. What does the surface that you're touching feel like? What do your feet feel like right now in this moment? Are they a little tingly? Are they warm? Are they cold? Maybe there's tension. Maybe there's pain. No sensation is bad. Just notice what is there. Just doing that brings you back into your body. So something that I've seen, over 20 years of being a massage therapist, when clients try to relax, I always know because they tense up. So for most of us, when we actually try to relax, what we're doing is we're still mental. We're still in our head and we're saying, okay, just relax. Come on, just relax. But that almost causes more anxiety because you're thinking, okay, my body's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And I just want to relax right now in this moment. And then you get frustrated. And again, your body is like, it's your enemy. It becomes like your enemy because you feel like you can't control it. So instead of trying to force yourself to relax, what I always tell people, and this works every time, instead of trying to force yourself to relax, just notice what's there. You have to notice without judgment. So none of it means anything, but just pay attention. What sensations am I aware of right now in this moment? What can I feel? What can I touch around me? How does my body feel? Is there tension anywhere? Is there, can I feel my breath? Can I feel my heartbeat? Can I feel what my body feels like? And for me, someone like me who, as I said earlier, like I couldn't feel my heartbeat because that gave me more anxiety. So do what makes sense for you. That's why I like the feet, because usually for most people, they're going to be okay there, starting there. That's not going to cause anxiety for them. But start someplace that is easy, just to be aware, just to bring that awareness back to your body is really important.
I love that. And, I'm sitting here thinking, you're talking about your five senses, which is sight, smell, taste, touch, hear. And we learn that when we're like 3-4 years old, right? We learn these things about our feelings. We learn and as you grow up and out of that little experience, people forget there's a reason why we're taught that. So we learn it and then we just forget it. And that's really a disservice. So now that we know how important that is, we all have learned how to use what we call grounding sensations. And that's just a word. It is a term, but it is just your five senses. So, like Deborah's saying, if you are somebody that is feeling triggered, right? If you're somebody, even if you're not feeling triggered, we do rush through life in chaos all day long because our life is on speed, and so even if you don't feel stressed, even if you're having a great day, still take those moments to notice, still take those moments, whether you're washing your hands or driving in the car, wherever you are, if you're at a stoplight, really learn to be aware of where you're at and then get in touch with yourself. And that's kind of what I think Deborah's is saying basically is come back home to yourself as often as you can during the day, because where you lie, which is within yourself, you're able to then, have better tools that can help you regulate and manage yourself.
And this is too why I do start with, you need to understand first why your nervous system is reacting the way it is, because if you don't feel safe in your own body, then doing
Right.
these kinds of exercises might not feel safe to you. So if you can first understand you are not broken. Your nervous system isn't broken. It's doing what it's doing on purpose because it's trying to protect you. And once you can understand that, you can start to have compassion and understanding, because there's lots of different reasons why we might have a dysregulated nervous system. It might be because of chronic stress. It might be because of trauma in your childhood. It might be because you had parents that were dysregulated and they didn't know how to teach you how to regulate. There's a lot of different issues and different things that can cause a dysregulated nervous system. The good news is it's completely changeable, that the brain is so plastic. It wants to learn to do new things. And so, but the first part is knowing that you are not broken, that this is changeable. And again, having compassion and even gratitude that your body is doing its best to protect you and keep you alive. It develops that processes for a reason, and it probably was necessary at one point. But if it's no longer serving you, then it just means we need to find some new ways to process, some new ways to react to things. And understanding that is really, really important part of the process.
Yeah. And I love what you just said about, the why, trying to uncover that, because I think in all aspects of wellness, whether it's your nervous system, whether it's, a weight loss journey, whether it's, learning how, to be more faithful, whatever it is that you're working on, you've got to know your story. You've got to
Mm-hmm.
understand your story. And I have really, truly figured out that once you identify and understand what it is that is triggering, what it is that has brought you where you are, and you notice, that you do have the ability to change, right? Because like she was saying, your brain has neuroplasticity where it's flexible, it's pliable. You can mold yourself differently, but you can't do that if you don't know where you're coming from. You've got to figure out that part first so that you could then, oh, I remember you, you're popping up again. It's like, this is from an old thing that happened to me lots of years ago, or maybe yesterday. It just depends. But again, I'm noticing that, and I can make the choice now. Does it serve me? Doesn't it serve me? And then how do I move away from it? And again, when you notice and you're doing all those things, I do believe that then you can go back into what Deborah's talking about, that the nervous system being more regulated when you're aware, when when you're not just zooming through life with your blinders on. And again, it can look all different from all different people. And I think that's the coolest thing. And it's also the most frustrating thing, because
Yes.
people in our society have been trained and taught, if you have a problem, you go to this person, they give you an answer, they give you a solution, it fixes it, and you move on. And unfortunately, that's been happening for a lot of decades, and it's not. And that's why we are where we are.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to undo a lot of those traditional ways of thinking and start implementing some of these new. And it's exciting. I mean, people should really look at it as, you can be so empowered to take control of the things that you want to within yourself, looking and learning. And I think the day you stop learning is the day, you're not going to grow. So I
And
just
I
love it.
and something for your audience too. I mean, this is nervous system regulation is really at the core. One of the reasons why this is my focus, even as a health coach, is it really is at the core of so many different things. Because as I said earlier, if you are not regulated, if you are in your fight or flight all the time, you cannot heal. And being in your fight or flight, again, it's not bad. But if you exist there all the time, it's going to cause other problems. Like you mentioned, weight loss. That's a big one. There's a lot of
Mhm.
people who cannot lose weight because their cortisol is so high.
Yeah.
Because when you have that response, that through that HPA axis, the hypothalamus tells the pituitary to tell the adrenals to release things like cortisol and adrenaline. And that process causes your liver to dump a bunch of glycogen into your bloodstream, which then raises your blood sugar, but even if you had eaten it, not eaten anything. And then that, if you don't actually have to use it because, you know, you're not actually needing a bunch of glucose to run or fight, you're sitting in your car in traffic and just stressed about your day and you're not moving, right? So now you have all this extra excess glucose in your bloodstream. And so now your pancreas is like, well, we got to get rid of that. Let's dump a whole bunch of insulin. And so it's the cycle that happens. The other thing is your digestion stops. When you are in that state, your digestion stops. And if you are not digesting your food, you're not getting the nutrients out of your food. If you're not getting nutrients, your cells aren't getting what they need. They're not able to rebuild. You're not able to heal. So nervous system regulation is so important. The doctor that I mentor with actually says if he could only address two things in every single one of his clients, it would be nervous system regulation and it would be gut health. And if you could just address those two things, it would probably heal the vast majority of people's issues. So it really is a big deal to look into this and to start address your nervous system. It can make such a huge difference. It has for me. Right. Since I've done the work to regulate my nervous system, I don't have a lot of the other issues that I was having before, the physical issues that I didn't know were related. Even something like my thyroid. I had really low thyroid. My thyroid is balanced now, not because of medication, not because of anything else, but just regulating my nervous system.
Yeah. And that's such a great point. And, you know, and I'm like huge into gut health, right? And you can do all the things, but if you are living in that fight or flight freeze, if, you know, freeze means that you're just stuck, you know, and if you are living primarily in that, again, you can do all the things, you know, and that can be even, you know, I'm a believer in integrative, I'm a believer in functional medicine. But what they do, like what Western does, is they do supplements rather than medication. And I do believe there is a place for each of those when needed. But if you are dysregulated and you are not able to absorb the nutrients from the supplements, or, you know, using a binder and trying to pull the stuff, if you're not able to live more in that parasympathetic state, you're just dumping money again, and it's not going to help. And so then you're stuck, then you're frustrated, then you think, oh, this guy's a quack. You know, he's not doing anything for me. And in actuality, you know, it is working and it will work, but you have to do that initial. And that's when I was talking about like the story and all of that, because I do think once we learn our story, once we learn what our triggers are, then we are able to be more regulated. And therefore, you're right, everything else then sort of falls into place. I do really believe in the gut brain axis and, you know, that how they each speak to each other and all of that. So the three combination of that, you know, really, like you said, I'm not sure who you study under, but like that doctor is spot on, because you've got to do the personal work, and the personal work is the regulation. And then you've got to do the actual, you know, medical work, you know, to get your gut permeability and all that. But again, none of that matters if you're constantly living in this, you know, fight or flight. And I wanted to tell you one story just because it is relatable to all of this. My daughter, we live in a neighborhood with bears. And so my daughter wanted to take a walk the other night, and I was like, you know, I haven't seen a bear lately, you know. So her and her friend went, and I said, call me immediately, you know, if you, not thinking they would actually see a bear, you know, but they did. And she called me and she was like, you know, come get me. She was up, like, you know, her adrenaline was pumping, you know, and of course I jumped in the car. They had run so fast, so far, so fast, because their adrenaline kicked in, right? And they were fleeing for their life, because in their minds, they were like, bear attack, which doesn't happen very often. And so that's why I think that analogy sometimes is so like far-fetched, but it did happen. And so when she got in the car, I said, you know, once, you know, she's like, my heart, it's still, you know, and I said, yeah, I said, your body was protecting you. I said, but look, I said, do you feel hungry right now? She's like, no. She's like, how could you, you know? And I said, exactly, that you're living it out. You're living something that we've talked about for so long, but you've never truly been able to experience in a way that you could feel it. So it does turn, and it turns it off, because you can't be hungry and eat while you're running from a bear. You know, it's like your body can't do two things at one time. So I am a firm believer in like the energy part of your body can't do multiple things, but it's always going to keep you safe. So it's going to trump, that's always going to trump everything else. So if you don't feel safe and you're not regulated, it doesn't matter what else you're doing. It doesn't. So this is why I
Yep.
wanted to have you on, because I knew this conversation is so top of the list for me. And I do know about it personally, but from, somebody who's studied it a little bit more, I wanted to have you on to give some advice, to give some tools to these people. And I think you've given some really great tools. We talked about grounding. We've talked about, even massage therapy. What are some other modalities that you present to people that, they can use to help themselves, kind of learn how to regulate?
So breath work is a big one. And it's one of the most, I think, underutilized tools that
Mm-hmm.
we have. And it's free and it's easy. And the problem I think most people experience though is they're not breathing correctly. I know I wasn't.
Right.
Even in massage school, I remember we were doing a breathing exercise. We're learning how to breathe correctly, and it felt so uncomfortable to me because I had not been breathing correctly for most of my life. Because when you are stuck in that fight or flight mode, you breathe really shallowly and you breathe up in the top part of your lungs. And so when you go to take a deep breath and when you expand up in here, up in the top part of your lungs, that's more the response of the sympathetic nervous system. That's trying to get oxygen in really, really quickly. Versus when the way we're supposed to breathe is deep into our diaphragm. Our diaphragm is a muscle that's like right up under our rib cage. And as the diaphragm should expand and should move down as we take a deep breath in. And then when we breathe out, it goes back up, and it ends up being kind of a massage for our organs. Like it's a beautiful way that our breath works. But the majority of us breathe vertically instead of breathing horizontally. Our rib cage is supposed to expand when we breathe in, and most people's don't. So if you haven't really learned to breathe correctly before, if you haven't been breathing correctly, the fascia is going to be tighter around the rib cage, the fascia is going to be tighter around that diaphragm, and it's going to feel uncomfortable when you first get started. So you're going to feel like you're doing it wrong. But I want everybody to go ahead and put your hands on the side of your rib cage, the bottom of your rib cage, and then take a deep breath in. A lot of people know about letting your belly out, which is great, but you also want to feel like your hands are moving to the side when you breathe in. So try in every breath in, try to let your hands expand out, expand horizontal. That's the proper way of breathing. The other thing that's really, really great to know with breath work is inhaling is really a sympathetic response. Exhaling is the parasympathetic response. A quick and fast way to calm your nervous system is to do like a 4-second inhale and then a 7-second exhale. Let your exhale be longer than your inhale, and it will trigger that vagus nerve. Okay, we're relaxing. We're calming down. So if counting is hard for you and that distracts you, it's okay. You don't have to count. It doesn't have to be exact. But letting that exhale be longer than your inhale, that's really what's most important. So breathing to try to remember, expand through your rib cage, and then letting that exhale be longer. That's a great exercise to do to calm the body.
I used to always tell my children, you're inhaling goodness, but you're exhaling the trash. And so you got to exhale longer, because just like making a recipe, you always have more trash than you have product. So,
I love that.
So, for them, it is a tool that I think you're right is very underutilized because the understanding of it is very has not been brought to the forefront enough. But for me, breathing, the connection of breath work and breathing came with yoga for me. I don't use yoga as a spiritual practice, but I use it for my breath work and I use it for my stretching, and I really use it to connect my breath with my body. And that's what I've learned from it so far. I'm not saying my journey won't change, but I'm just saying that was kind of my light bulb moment of, oh, okay, someone's telling me to inhale on this and exhale on this. And it really gave me the awareness to slow down, to see that connection. And so again, if you haven't dabbled in, yoga, if it's something you're interested in, if you're looking to figure out ways to connect with breath in your body, breathing is great. But if you're more like wanting to actually incorporate it into things, yoga would be my personal next, little thing that you could, try to utilize your breath work once you learn how to do it. And there's so many different, there's the box breathing, there's, inhaling, holding, and you've got to figure out what works for you. But once you're aware of a subject or a topic like breath work, do some reading, research yourself. Don't just rely on one person's experience. be your own knowledge seeker, you know, and I think that's this whole podcast for me is about that. Like, here's information, you know, here are people that are experts in these areas. Now you have to kind of do your own side of things. You can't just rely on somebody to give you all the answers, because magically, you know, everybody is different. So you don't have a magic answer. But I
Exactly.
do love
Yeah.
the breath work. I think breath work is super important. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. I know that you are versed in craniosacral therapy or
Mhm.
massage therapy, and some people have never experienced that or heard of that, and I think it's magical. So I would really
Mhm.
love for you to just explain a little bit. We all know the deep, you know, tissue massage. We know what, I don't know, like the traditional massages that you go when you go to a spa, but craniosacral is just a little bit different,
Mhm.
but super powerful. So if you could explain to the audience what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love craniosacral therapy. And really, that's what um, I would say more even than massage got me into nervous system regulation, just because with craniosacral therapy, man, that gets you into your parasympathetic. And I can get people's bodies to relax deeper than anything else when I
Right.
use this modality. So essentially, it was first created and only used by osteopaths, and it's kind of based on the concept that there is, and we know this, there's movement in the cerebral with the cerebral spinal fluid. The central nervous system is your brain and spinal cord, and that exists kind of in a water balloon state, and it kind of exists with that cerebral spinal fluid. But there's a movement to it. There's a movement that your brain has and your spinal cord, and it's kind of like your heartbeat, where there's this gentle movement, and it impacts all the way out through the nerves through the rest of your body. And if that movement is interrupted for any reason, it's going to cause problems. So the doctor, why am I suddenly forgetting his name? Sutherland. Dr. Sutherland, who kind of was the first one that discovered this. He was studying the cranium, and he was studying and looking at the structure of the cranium and how the different bones fit together. And a lot of doctors will still say, no, craniosacral therapy, they're all a bunch of quacks. Because what's still taught is that everything is sutured together, and bone is hard and bone doesn't live. And bone basically just, it's hard, it doesn't move. And when he looked at the cranium, when he looked at the head, the bones in the head, he was looking at the different sutures, and he said, you know what? These look like gears. These look like gears that fit together that allow for movement. And so he started doing some research basically on his own. He started doing some experiments on himself. He created a helmet that actually
Okay.
prevented movement in different parts of his head to see what would happen, and then had his family write down, you know, what they experienced, you know, changes in his personality. He had changes, physical changes, he had emotional changes. Like, it caused all sorts of problems when a part of his head was stuck. And so for a lot of people, it might not be that you had, you know, it might be that you had some kind of injury. It might be that you know, fell and hit your head when you were little. It could have just been as you were coming out through the birth canal. You know, all of those bones change, and they're supposed to, right? That's why the cranium is not fully formed at that point, because it needs to allow for all that movement. But how you ended up could impact how the rest of your body is working, because your nervous system basically controls everything else. So with craniosacral therapy, we're looking for, where is the person stuck? Where are things not moving the way that they should, so that the nervous system can't have that really easy time flowing back and forth.
That's the best explanation I've ever heard. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think it just drew a picture for me that I never had envisioned before. So I really appreciate that. I have had experience with it, and what I will say is it is a light touch. It's not something deep. It's energy moving is the way I kind of look at it. Now I
Mm-hmm.
understand the gear part and all of that, but it is the most relaxed that I ever feel when I leave a session. I mean, to the
Yes.
point where you're almost lethargic, because it's like your body has truly been put back into that period. I mean, just my one daughter had it, I don't know, last year. I think she had her first one, and she came out and she was just like, that was wild and so
Mm-hmm.
amazing. And I've never in my life, and she's my one that has a little bit more of the anxiety type behaviors or feelings. And, you know, she's like, I've never been that relaxed before. And so I said,
Mm-hmm.
see, these are things that show you what's possible. So
Yes.
if you've never kind of dipped into that kind of therapy, again, it's not invasive. It's very light touch. You actually don't think a lot's going on, but I can promise you, obviously with what Deborah just explained, but even with a personal experience, so much happens during that session.
It's honestly the most powerful. It's my preferred. Not everybody, because there is this idea that no pain, no gain.
Yeah,
And so I definitely have clients that come in, they're like, no, you need to like, dig your elbow into my body, and that's what's going to make a difference. And if they are firmly set in that mindset, then I know that, yeah, light touch, they're going to sit there, they're going to get stressed. They're going to be thinking she's not doing
sure.
anything, and they're not going to be in their body. And so it's not going to be as effective. But if someone can actually like, no, I can be in my body and I'm open to the idea of what this could do for me. It's amazing. It's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I'll share one last thing. I had an injury in high school where I pulled my hip or my leg out of my socket. And obviously back then there was little therapy. It wasn't like a lot of understanding at all of like what happens with scar tissue and all of that. So for years I've had scar tissue buildup and issues and, been a chiropractor and stuff. And I went to a massage person who had a lot of training in a lot of different modalities. And one of the things she did was kind of that light touch energy, cranial sacral type thing. And over the weekend, I thought, what happened? Like, I can barely move my leg. I said to my husband, I think she damaged, it was like all these things were going through my mind. And on Monday morning, I called back to the chiropractor. I said, what is, and he didn't laugh, but he was just like, you got energy back through that area. It was so stagnant for so long. There was such a blockage. She just basically released it. And that's when I was like, that's wild. Like, that's so cool. And that, again, just these little things make you believe as you try it out for yourself. So if you're somebody who is looking for something different or just curious, I definitely would recommend trying out cranial sacral, just for the curiosity factor and just see what it could do for you, because you never know. You don't even know where you're stagnant because you don't even know where the blockages are, because again, you have no idea what's happened in your life, that has caused those things. Even if you have a good story and your story and all your triggers, you don't know how your body's interpreted that. And I think that's the cool thing about body talk also, that I learned about, that I think and actually went through, I think really helped me shed layers of things that I didn't even know that I had going on. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
I'm one who will try anything. If you haven't noticed, I'm like, yeah,
Right.
sure, I'll
I
try it.
love it.
There's no needles
I'm the same
involved.
way.
I'm like, I'll definitely try it. Okay. So again, thank you so much for coming on. I know that I'm going to think of 100 more questions and probably have you back on later, because there's just so much that we could dive into. But I want to respect your time and my audience. And so I just want to end, first of all, is there anything that you can think of really quick that you want to say that maybe we left out?
The only other thing that I was thinking that I would love to add is just gratitude, and
Yeah.
how, because we've talked about some things to get you into your body, but there's the top down approach and the bottom up approach. Bottom up approach is more things you do to get back into your body. The top down approach is more about what you can do mentally. And for me, gratitude, I think, is the most important thing, because it changes the way your brain perceives the world around you. So when you have a gratitude practice, which a simple thing that I do every morning is think of 3 things that I'm grateful for from the day before. And when you have that practice set and you're going to look for those 3 things that next day, or write them down, it makes your brain look for those things throughout the day. Your brain is going to focus on, oh, I'm actually grateful for this thing, and this is positive, and this is positive, instead of we can get stuck in this thing is going wrong, this thing is going wrong, this thing is going wrong. And our brain gets used to noticing all of those things. Versus when we have something like gratitude practice, we're telling our brain, actually, I want you to focus on all the positive things. I want you to focus on the things in my life that I'm actually grateful for. And we actually notice them more. We live in that, we experience them more. Whereas otherwise, they might just go through our day. And it can be something super simple. Like, after this, I'm going to sit and make some tea, and just sitting there and holding like a hot cup of tea. And in that moment, like, oh, that's so comforting. I'm so grateful for that.
I think people look at gratitude and sometimes they get caught up in like needing to have these giant things, right?
Yes.
Or it's the traditional, like, I'm grateful for my husband, I'm grateful for this. And it's like that the point of the exercise is really to become present in what you're doing all day, so that you can find ones that are not just the obvious, right? You want to look for
Yes.
the inobvious ones that actually add value to your day. And that could be a cup of tea, and it could
Mhm.
be a hug from your daughter, or whatever. It could be, the filtered water that comes out of the refrigerator, whatever it is at that moment that clicks. That's what she's kind of saying. And your practice will evolve. Everything you do is not a start here and end here. Wellness is a journey, and that includes all practices of journaling, gratitude, wherever you are, you start and then you expand as you start to shift and grow. So I love
Mhm.
that you brought that up. I think that's super important. So on that note,
Mhm.
I always ask my guests for 3 non-negotiables, because I'm all about the little 1% shifts that become non-negotiables that we ourselves, that we live out daily, that helps us to have our best, wellness for not just the day, but the day and each day that kind of proceeds. And those things can obviously shift. But so right now for you, what are a couple of things that are your non-negotiables daily?
So one of the big ones is my morning routine.
Mhm.
Making sure, and that means making sure I give myself time.
Mhm.
I used to, when I was really stuck in my anxiety, I used to rush through my mornings. I would sleep as long as I possibly could. And then I'd be rushing and I'm trying to and I'm frantic, and it starts your day in that frantic state. And
Mhm.
so what has made a huge difference for me in really dealing with my anxiety is getting up earlier, having things that I can do in the morning. And maybe you start with one thing. Maybe your one thing that you start with is gratitude. Because I know I was always the person that tried to change my life overnight, over and over and over again, and that
Mhm.
never works. So you want to start small. So if you currently don't have a morning routine, don't tell yourself that you're going to do these 10 things every single morning, because you won't.
That's
Start with
right.
one thing. For me, honestly, I actually started with making my bed every day. Like, I'm
Yep.
just going to make my bed every morning. And that's going to be my one thing that I do. After that, it was I'm going to drink a glass of water before I do anything else. And then I slowly added on to it. And so now I have a longer list. I can't always do all of them every morning, but I have some kind of morning routine where I'm starting my day in a calm state, and that sets the tone. One of those things that's really important if you struggle with you're managing your cortisol is to make sure you eat before you drink coffee. Eat something within 30 to 60 minutes of waking up. And that makes a huge difference in managing your cortisol. And specifically, make it high protein. Get between 20 to 30 grams of protein within 30 to 60 minutes of waking up. And that can make a massive difference for your cortisol management for the rest of the day. So yeah, morning routine is
I'm
one.
glad you brought that up, though. I just want to pause for a second. I'm glad you brought that up, because again, there's an overwhelm of information right now out there on when to eat, when not to eat, when to fast, when to do this, and what I like to tell everybody is just stop and pick one thing to focus on wherever you
Yes.
are. Start for yourself, not what Sally's doing, not what Jerry's doing. It's like, let's just do one thing for you and see how it
Yes.
feels. And if you eat 30 minutes upon, waking up, and out 90 minutes later you don't feel good, then push it to 60 minutes. If you feel better eating it 60 minutes, great. But it's an experiment. So
Mm-hmm.
I like and appreciate that you kind of brought that up, because I feel like there's such an overwhelm right now of all the different January things being thrown at
Yeah,
people. And I just constantly remind people, you're bio individual. You are different. If you don't have a cortisol issue, you might not have to eat 30 to 60 minutes before you wake up. If you're
exactly.
somebody that is in menopause, or have this or that, you might be somebody, so again, it's everybody's different. So don't look at your neighbor.
Absolutely. And I love intermittent fasting. I think it's a
Yep.
fantastic practice. But if you are someone who is stuck in an anxious state,
Yep.
not eating can be a trigger. And so that's just
Correct.
something that I
Yep.
recommend if you are stuck in that anxious state. My husband actually just changed. He's been doing intermittent fasting for 2 years, felt
Mhm.
great, but he was something as simple as he was noticing he was having anxiety sweat, and he
Mhm.
hates to stink. And he has a very physical job, but he hates to stink. And he was noticing halfway through the day, he's having to change his shirt, and he couldn't figure out why is this all of a sudden changing, that I'm having this stinky anxiety sweat every day. Since he started eating 30 to 60 minutes high protein, that's gone away.
Mhm.
And so
Interesting.
it depends. Whereas it was making him feel great in every other way,
Mhm.
but it was changing the amount of cortisol he was having through his day. So if that's something you're
Love that.
struggling with, then that's something
Yep.
that could be really helpful. The other major thing is sleep. Yeah, that is something, again, I think we don't, and it's hard for a lot of people to get sleep, to fall asleep. Maybe if you already have other chronic health issues, sleep might be a problem for you. But if you're not sleeping, your body's not healing. your body's not resetting. And that is a huge non-negotiable for me. I really prioritize sleep for overall health, but especially for nervous system regulation. Your brain's just not going to function unless you're getting really good quality sleep. So that's something that is really important to me. And really, I'll give a simple tip. Dr. Andrew Huberman talks about this a lot, is get sunlight exposure in your eyes.
Yep.
Within it. Exactly. It resets your circadian rhythm. And that's, again, sleep can be an issue if you have unbalanced cortisol, because it's that rhythm of cortisol and melatonin that basically manages our day. So sleep is a big one.
One thing I tell, and most people who know me well know, do not look at your phone when you first wake up. That screws up the whole circadian rhythm. Like when she talks about waking up slowly and doing that morning routine and slow, if you don't do anything else, do not hop on your phone. Get some sunlight in your eyes before you do anything, because that will help the sleep. And when people say they have a hard time sleeping, that's the first thing we investigate. What does your night, if you're drifting off to sleep looking at your blue light, you're most likely not going to sleep well, So again, people just don't know what they don't know. And so bringing those little things up, and it's a simple change. That's simple. And people, it doesn't cost anything. It's actually healthy for you not to have your phone near you. It's just a matter of getting in a new habit, because we're so habitual. We're just habitual creatures. And we feel like, this thing is like attached to us. And if we're walking out and we don't have it near us, we feel this sense of like, I'm naked, and it's kind of interesting because we didn't grow up, our generation didn't grow up like that. Our children, very different, but our generation, we didn't have phones until I was in my 20s, so it's something that I know I can go back and reverse.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I know I struggle with it.
Sure.
I want to like zone out and look at my phone before I go to sleep, because, it's been a long day and I just don't want to think anymore. And it's an easy like thing to do, but I know if I do it, I'm not going to fall asleep. I'm going to really struggle to fall asleep. So setting those boundaries is really important. And then I would say the third thing is movement. Getting movement in every day, whatever that looks like, as much as I can walk. Walking's a big one. Walking is huge for mental health. We tend to think like, I need to do this really intense exercise and just start with walking. If you're not doing anything, just start with walking. And maybe you start with walking around the block. If you can go outside, even better, because when we can interact with nature, it has such a huge impact on our nervous system. That's like one of the best ways to regulate your nervous system, is to interact with nature. So taking a walk is such a great thing to do, but any kind of movement. We were not meant to be sedentary creatures. And again, this doesn't just help your nervous system, it helps your entire body function better, and helps your overall health, but it really does help mental health. That moving your body, the bilateral movement of your body just helps your brain, activates the right and left sides of your hemispheres, and it just does so much for your brain. Exercise, actually, I thought this was fascinating. They've done some studies that showed that if you did 20 minutes of exercise 3 times a week, it was actually more effective than antidepressants. It's more effective at treating depression than antidepressants were. Exercise is powerful for our minds. It's not just about gaining muscle, which muscle is really important too, but it is powerful for our minds. So start with just walking. If you can move on to body weight exercises, a couple times a week, like that really makes a huge difference.
Notice what she's saying, everyone. She's not saying to go to the gym 3 times a week for an hour and go crazy. It's simple. And I think, again, we fear that simple because it's not enough, because we've been told that that's not good enough, that that's not going to get you anywhere, that you've got to be in the gym and you've got to be doing all these things. And that's so invalid. And so, please don't, discount or feel shame or feel judgment because you're just walking, because it's not just walking. You're getting so much more out of that, especially if you're someone who has a dysregulated nervous system. The other thing is, if you don't have, a firm 30 minutes to do all together, break it up. You're standing at the sink, take a stretch, stretch your body. If you're somebody who sits at your computer a lot, get up and just take a lap. All of that stuff adds up. It doesn't have to be like it would be great to have that practice, but if you're not there yet, it's okay. Just start somewhere. Just take that first step and then build from there. I do believe, outside nature's miracles. It's miraculous. It gives us so much more than anybody's ever really talked about. So if you're not somebody who typically gets outside, maybe put that as your challenge for the week. I want to get outside 3 times and I just want to breathe in nature, and even if you live in a freezing place, bundle up and get the cold, because I'm not a lover of the cold, but if it means to bundle up and to walk outside, even just to take the trash out, whatever, it's still something. You're still getting yourself prepared to go do something. And I think that our bodies are really trainable. That's something that I've
Hmm.
learned,
Yes.
because the neuroplasticity you were talking about, I have a yoga mat that I've been using religiously since COVID, since we were, I used it before, but it was never always out. And it's always out now. And when I sit
Mhm.
down to do my quiet time, it literally is like my body knows it wants to take that deep inhale and just kind of release. And no matter if I'm doing yoga on my mat, if I'm meditating, if I'm rolling my back out, if I'm doing my journaling, I do it on that mat because for some reason my body, it's just been conditioned that that's my place. So find a place is what I'm saying. Find somewhere that you create. What it doesn't have to be fancy. I'm talking about a purple mat on the floor, sit on your bed. It doesn't make a difference. Make something that's just your space, so that your body kind of starts becoming aware of that space, and see if it works for you. Because I've been so like fascinated by the fact that I've been able to train my body to do that. And you can
Mhm.
too, because I'm nothing special. Thank you again so much for coming on. Guys, I know that you've definitely walked away with a lot of different things to try on. I would love to hear from you. I'm going to drop all of Deborah's information in the show notes. I'll drop her social media handles, where you can reach out to her, the programs you can see that she does. And if you just have questions, reach out to her. I'm sure that she would be happy to answer them for you. And until next time, I
Absolutely.
hope you guys have a wonderful day. And thanks so much again for coming on. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.